Hello, good people of the world. It's Oliver here, and the Natural High Club is about the pursuit of happiness in all its forms. Just to explain the format of the podcast a little more, this isn't a highly produced and highly edited interview. I'm a journalist, and I want to retain the flow and authenticity in these discussions, so I leave them largely free of studio tinkering. So apologies in advance for any hesitation, repetition, misquotes, or moments of poor quality sound and outside ambience. I just feel it's best to give you the whole picture from each carefully chosen person that I speak to. They are substantial and meaty interviews which you might come to view as companions that you can download and then pick up and put down in chunks in the midst of your busy lives. In this episode, an energy special, I speak to Tom Luff, who works for the British government to find new ways to power the world in a sustainable fashion. We discussed the question of whether we're completely buggered moving forward, or if we have the necessary plans and measures in place for a seamless transition from fossil fuels to more sustainable power sources over the coming decades and beyond. It's a shorter than normal podcast, but as well as our primary conversation about the planet, we still managed to get some of Tom's natural highs in there, including a fascinating novel by Jean-Paul Sartre. As usual, you can get in touch with me with any questions, suggestions or comments by emailing oliver@naturalhigh.club or tweeting me @naturalhighclub. Enjoy the show. Tom!
Hey, how you doing?
Fantastic, I got the right guy. That was real pot luck.
I don't know if there are other ones on there, but yeah.
No, making out as if you've got a really rare name.
It's not that common.
No, it's not that common. How are you? How are the Dickens?
Good. Yeah, really good.
Yeah? And how's parenthood? Because I know you, Tom, as a very, very busy man, and I wonder how you've managed to assimilate another extra huge element in your life.
It's simply a priority thing that with Dennis, I kind of realised that he's much more important, and I spend much more time with him and outside work and leave. Generally, I mean, I'm not as good at leaving as I would like to be, like leaving on time as I'd like to be, but it's definitely possible.
Well, you must be working less hours then with Dennis as well.
I think I'm working less hours, but I'm probably
doing
more productive. Yeah, I realised when I was working longer hours, which is that time to think is really important, and the time to think isn't always. If you contain your hours a bit more and work reasonable hours and you're not really exhausted, then you have much more time to think and you make better decisions, I think.
Could I use the term smart working maybe? Would that be at all appropriate?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, that's a term that I've been trying to use, not so much for myself, but actually when we do moderations and sort of appraisals of people at work to decide, what kind of how to rate them, I've really pushed the term smart working because there's a tendency to think, well, let's reward people who kind of like manage big crises and that kind of stuff. But actually, the best people really are the ones that work smart and avoid those kind of things from happening and make the right decisions early on. So, yeah, I think smart work is the right way.
So all about the output, isn't it, rather than when you clock on and when you clock off, surely, in this day and age.
Exactly.
We're moving on to work more quickly than I'd like, but we will move on to more leisurely aspects of life again in a minute. But basically, Tom, and just to explain to my show, Tom and I go back a long way. As far as I can remember, he's always done some important sounding job for the Ministry of Defence or the government in general. But when I looked at your most recent job title on LinkedIn, I saw Head of Financial Incentives, Clean Electricity. And I thought that's exactly the sort of person that I would like to interview. Someone who can tell me what the hell's going on with the status quo in terms of energy in this world, hopefully. As you know, I'm sort of, I love to sort of find a controversy wherever possible. And energy is something which is obviously a hot potato. So I wonder if you can tell me, to a degree that you're comfortable with, what your job entails.
Funnily enough, since I put that stuff on LinkedIn, maybe this is a good thing about LinkedIn. I actually got sort of a promotion, which is quite nice. So the work really it's about trying to get more clean electricity. So our electricity is traditionally produced by fossil fuels. That's kind of gas, coal, but there's also a bit of nuclear in the mix as well. And the aim of the work is to change that mix so we have more low carbon electricity or clean electricity, which might be renewable electricity. It might be more nuclear electricity, and it might be things called carbon capture and storage, which is where you have fossil fuels, but you kind of keep the emissions from that. And my particular focus has been on renewables, and I've been leading a couple of support schemes, basically, to help pay for renewable electricity. Because the problem with renewable electricity is it's tended to be more expensive than coal and gas. So the only way we've found to get people to produce it is to give them a little bit of a top up so that it's worth their while, and then they go off and produce it.
So how long have fossil fuels got left? Can you estimate how long it is before that resource completely dries up, coal and gas and things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, to be honest, I don't think anyone really knows, because there's quite a lot of it in the ground, but then it's the cost that you have to pay to extract it. So you can keep putting more money into it and getting more and more out, but at some point you're going to say it's not really worth it. We might as well use other forms of power instead.
Do we have a good plan in place for renewable fuels for the next century and alternative sources of energy, or would you say that we are in crisis already?
I'm not a scientist, so I wouldn't tell you categorically where we are on sort of actually is the planet now beyond repair. I think the Paris deal that was reached at the end of last year was a really good step forward, and by all accounts the experts were saying, if we can do all of this, this is just about enough, and then we should be on a kind of a sustainable footing.
Can you explain quickly what happened in Paris?
So what happened in Paris was every year for the last since about 1997, lots and lots, in fact, probably even before that, but lots and lots of meetings around the world to bring together all the different countries to say, can you commit to reducing your emissions? And what happened in Paris was there was a bit of a breakthrough in terms of where the experts wanted us to get to. There was a breakthrough in terms of countries kind of signing up to meet that sort of target.
It's a difficult one, that, isn't it? Because I suppose, a country, for example, like America, would be sort of forthright about the idea of reducing, carbon emissions, etc., in their industry. But then a country like China, for example, would possibly have a problem with that, because they're a real manufacturing country at the moment, aren't they? And America's already gone past that, I suppose, in many ways. They've become a service sector country, a country which is strong in terms of financial institutions. So do you understand where I'm going with that?
Yeah, definitely. That's the big thing. And that's why it's been so hard to reach an agreement. Quite honestly, we need to recognise the fact that we've already gone through all of that hard work, and we pumped out loads of emissions in the past to get to the level of development that we have in this country and America has over there. So we do definitely need to recognise that it's not a level playing field like that. And that's what the deal aims to do, and particularly for really poor countries, it recognises that, and there's sort of transfers. We will be paying for decarbonisation in those countries. For example, the UK, I think we give a number of £billion into a fund to pay for renewable electricity and stuff in poorer countries.
That's really interesting, because I wondered whether big governments, powerful governments, were sensitive to those sorts of issues, because obviously they're really relevant, aren't they?
Exactly.
If you asked me, I'm a layman, okay? I'm interested in energy, but I know nothing about it. If you asked me about which sources we should be using for clean energy, I would instinctively and immediately say to you that we should harness the natural elements in this world, and the cleanest and therefore most efficient sources of energy would be wind, solar and water. Is it possible to run the world on those power sources alone, and is enough investment going into those areas, or are they just not efficient or commercially attractive enough for big businesses and for governments?
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. That's the kind of heart of my conundrum at the moment. And as to say, my focus has been trying to get renewable electricity to be deployed. Renewable, what do we have? We've got those things that you mentioned, so wind, solar. We've got maybe a bit of tidal and wave power, maybe some hydro from rivers and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
As I said, at the moment, it is more expensive, but the costs are coming down. And what we need to do is make sure that we're focusing our efforts, and actually also the industry is focusing their efforts on bringing those costs down, so that at some point in the future, hopefully in the next decade, it will be as competitive as fossil fuels, and it will be able to compete without us having to pay for it. Because what you need to remember is that the other side of the equation is people have to pay for this stuff. So, and actually at the moment they pay for it through their electricity bills, and nobody really likes paying more money than they think they need to in their electricity bills. So the sooner we can bring the costs down so that actually it's cheaper, the better.
How much of our technological advancements where it comes to renewable fuels is being driven by big business and how much by governments?
I think it's got to be a mixture. I mean, there are different schools of thought, and some people say basically just let business do it all itself. And I think that's a bit misleading because sometimes there isn't really incentive to do that. There's not the demand for it without government kind of creating that demand. But then again, what you can't do, and I don't think what public would really like, is give government did it all itself and then ended up spending a lot of money and maybe not making the right decisions. So it's a mixed thing. But certainly there's a need for some intervention, but maybe less so in the future.
Do you think that big businesses are concerned more with the short term, maybe, and as you've already spoken about the sort of cost of producing cleaner fuel, they haven't quite got the economies of scale there yet, so they'd rather just stick with what they've got?
Yeah, I'm sure there's an element of that. I mean, some of the I think the order of things has got to be government's got to set a direction and say this is where we want to get to, and then give businesses that vision so that they can work out, well, what's the best, how do I kind of exploit that market in a positive way, because obviously that's what they're about kind of filling needs in order to make money. But government sets the vision, market then finds the opportunities, but along the way you might need some aspect of kind of either government paying for things, or actually in other ways government sort of saying you can't do these things. And so an example of that is by 2025 we've recently said in this country that we're not going to have any more coal power plants at all. We're going to phase them out altogether.
I suppose if we assume that one of the main objectives of any government in a democratic process, in reality, if one of their main aims is to secure power for the following term, i.e. a few years down the line, does that sort of push long-term plans, things for energy, for example, down the priority list? Do governments perhaps not put enough importance and investments on such agendas as they know it will be a hard sell to sort of increase income tax to solve the problem, or just redelegate a lot of funds to solve a problem which is 50 years away from sort of coming to a head?
Yeah, they do. And I'd say two things on that. One is you need international cooperation to hold other countries, each other to account. Because if you just look at it in your own terms, there is that tendency to kind of, turn the other way and say, well, it's a long-term thing. Let's just focus on the here and now, and then you don't solve the problem. So if you have international cooperation, like, as I said, the Paris deal, but also actually through the through Europe and the cooperation there, you can kind of get better accountability. But the other thing is, in this country, we put into law a long-term plan that is kind of, doesn't matter which government is in place, you have to maintain a pathway to reducing the emissions.
Fantastic. And are there some really strict and obvious and transparent metrics in that plan, or is it a little bit vague, or are there some measurable targets?
Yeah, it is very clear cut. I mean, there's a very defined end point, which is by 2050 we have to have 80% less emissions than we did in 1990.
Right.
And that's very clear. And then there's a pathway to getting there. And actually, to help things, there's an independent body called the Committee on Climate Change, which isn't part of government, but that's there to say these are the things that we recommend you do. And then Parliament holds the government to account in terms of whether it's met those sort of milestones or not.
Do international governments and international bodies, do they work together unhindered on energy solutions as they should do, and as they should do in many other areas as well? Or is there some kind of hidden agenda and sort of technological secrecy between nations, a sort of, a race to the top in terms of harnessing, marketing and profiting from the next big energy resources?
Yeah, I think there is, there's definitely cooperation. There's different, again, some different schools of thought, as it were, about what the best way of doing that is, and definitely the market has to play a big part of that. And if they're not able to kind of then get profits for making new innovations, then there's not really an incentive for them to do that. But then again, by cooperating and really targeting funding in a kind of a cooperative way, a coordinated way actually across the world, can probably get better results. So it's got to be a mixture of those two things.
Mm-hmm. And in reality, do you think that we are all helping each other? Do we have a common goal that we're all working towards, or do you think that there is some? No, obviously, as you say, money's got a big part to play in this whole energy solution, hasn't it? And if
well, I don't know really. I think that we've got some really positive and good renewable technology. Solar, for example, that's come down in cost significantly over the last 5 and 10 years, to the extent that in some places, like in Mexico, it's kind of competing with fossil fuels already, which is really amazing.
Awesome.
Wind power in this country, particularly offshore wind, has a huge potential. It's coming down in cost quite significantly. So there and actually hydropower, which is something that we've been doing for a long time, and we forget it's a renewable power sometimes. That's been really, it's quite an established technology already. So I'm not sure if there's necessarily like a big. I mean, I'm sure there will be all sorts of new technologies that come in and change the way we see things. But I think the thing at the moment is, can we keep getting it built, and that will gradually drive down the cost.
In theory, could we roll out a solution which is purely based on wind, water and solar? Is that at all possible, or do you think it's going to have to be part of the solution just because of pure economics?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's sort of like the million dollar question, because if I came at this as a pure kind of environmentalist, I'd say let's just do that. Let's just do renewables. That's got to be the cleanest way. The first thing to say is, you're right. The cost has to be part of the consideration, and is it right to go straight to that, or is there a period where you go through slightly cheaper technologies which might not be quite so clean until you end up with more of the pure clean stuff? The other thing to think about is how they create electricity. And obviously, if you're a wind power producer, you can only create electricity when the wind is blowing.
Sure. Right,
which is different to gas, which is it's on all the time. And obviously, at the moment, if I go home and I want to switch the light on, I don't want to think, well, is it windy or not? And therefore, can I switch my light on? I just want to have electricity straight away. So there is a lot of work going on thinking about, well, how do you better balance the sort of electricity system so that instead of having to have the sort of the supply following the demand, i.e. switch my light on, therefore you need to have gas burning, have it maybe more the other way around, which is actually, do I need to have that electricity produced all the time, or can I spread it out, like having storage? If you had like more batteries, then it wouldn't matter so much when the wind was blowing, because you'd store your battery up and then use it when you need it. And actually, there's one final thing I'd say on that, which is a bit kind of complex to explain. I probably won't explain it very well, but it's something called demand side management or demand side response. And that's where you kind of say, well, there are some things in your house that you might not need to use all the time, but at the moment we do. So an example is like a fridge. You've got that on all the time and it's always electricity, but actually you could turn it off for a few seconds and it wouldn't really matter, and you turn it back on again, and it doesn't affect anything about inside your fridge, but it just means that you can reduce if you do that with 1 million fridges across the country, you've reduced the amount of electricity that's needed, and that can be a really good way of balancing it instead of having to create more electricity.
You articulated that beautifully, in fact, and that's a really interesting point. I'm sure we could become much, much more efficient with our use of electricity, without a doubt. And talking about efficient fuel, would you say then that nuclear fuel is here to stay? A part of that question, I suppose, is what's the difference? I'd like to know what the difference is between nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. And what about fracking? It even sounds horrific, and I've heard that it's got some really negative side effects. What about these three forms of power? Is there any future in any of those?
Every technology has kind of pluses and minuses to some extent. So there isn't going to be a silver bullet. And really, from a kind of if you're going to be sensible about this, you want to have a mix of different technologies. At least for the early stage, until you know which one is going to be the long-term future. Because if you put all your eggs in one basket, you might end up with problems. Nuclear, I always get mistaken between what is fission and fusion, I'm afraid. But one of them is a proven technology that we already have.
I think that's fission.
Could be amazing. Okay, the other one could be amazing. It could be a massive game changer, but it's always just out of reach in terms of the technological development. So we haven't actually been able to do it in a way that's kind of cost effective yet. But it could massively change things in the future.
Is it something that a lot of money and investment is going into right now?
Yeah, lots of money and investment is going into it, but it should go into it for the last 50 years, I think. So it's been a long period of time where people have thought, well, maybe it's just around the corner, but it's never quite materialized. On nuclear more broadly, I mean, I think there definitely is a future for nuclear. There's a public perception issue, and I think there's a fear that it's dangerous. And the stuff in Japan a few years ago really made people feel that they didn't want nuclear in the future. But we do have perspective. I think I've heard something that I haven't been able to verify it, but it said that lots of people were evacuated from that area in Fukushima in Japan. But actually, there was no real need to do that, but certainly not the scale that happened. And it meant that actually, even far from actually saving people's lives, actually more people died as a result of the evacuation than did because nobody actually died as a result of the actual accident. So we do have to put these things into perspective, but then again, we have to respect the fact that if people are worried by it, then that's something that is concerning.
Yeah, I mean, of course, if I was near a flooded nuclear power station which looked completely unstable, I'd want to get the hell out, wouldn't you?
That's exactly the concern. And if you paint it in that way, then you're right. But I think there's a kind of question about, well, how far away is safe? And I think the exclusion zone, the evacuation zone, was pretty wide in Japan. And actually now they're looking at it and saying, well, there probably didn't need to be quite such a reaction. But I completely, you're absolutely right. It's not just about those hard facts. It's also about the perception of it that's important.
I mean, it's a big percentage of our fuel consumption these days, isn't it? Nuclear fuel.
We've got 20% or so, something like that. There's a great app you can get. I don't know what the name of it is anymore, but it shows you at any given time what our electricity mix is.
Wow.
And so it tells you how much is renewables, how much is coal, how much is gas, how much is nuclear. It's really good.
Oh, I'd love to find out what that's called. I will definitely do some research on that. So what about fracking?
But yeah, you're right. Fracking is probably the most kind of contentious issue at the moment in the energy space, or one of them at least. Yeah, America's doing it a lot. We've got the go ahead to do it, and but there's been lots of kind of backlash, and especially from the kind of the environmental groups that are saying, how can you say that you want to reduce your emissions when you're doing all this work to produce more gas? And I think that's probably looking at it slightly the wrong way, which is, there's still in our plans quite a long time left where we will still need to use gas. And if we can reduce the cost of that gas, then that's a good thing. And if we can reduce the instability or increase the stability with which we can get it, then that's a good thing. There's been a link put forward by some people that say that it creates earthquakes. Now I think there is a very, very minor link there, which obviously, if you're in the region, you'd want to understand and think, is that a risk worth paying? But I think it's been proven that it's a very, very small link. So I mean, I don't know. I'm overall, I would think that it would be great if we could do as much as possible from renewable stuff. But while we're still using gas, it seems a sensible thing to kind of get the resources where we can.
In your opinion, in your experience, which energy source is sort of gaining the most interest amongst governments and big businesses right now? Which is the one that's gaining the most sort of generating the most excitement?
It's got to be solar. And that's because it's a global phenomenon, and there are lots of countries now that are thinking, we could do a whole load of solar, and it's probably about the not too much more expensive, if at all, than fossil fuels, and especially if you combine it perhaps with some kind of storage system, which means that, because obviously the problem with solar is you can only use it in the daytime, but if you can combine it with storage, then that would be great. I mean, I think for this country, offshore wind is the one to watch, and we've already got the world's biggest resource of onshore wind, and in terms of the number of wind farms we've got out at sea. We're kind of getting further and further out, which is giving us more and more electricity production. And I should say, about offshore wind is that you don't get kind of people saying, well, I don't really like the look of that, or in my backyard kind of thing. It's something that's out at sea and sort of isn't so visible to people.
We're talking about wind power terminals, right? I think they look great.
I do too.
Such a small price to pay for clean energy.
Yeah, I do too. I think there's clearly a chunk of society that doesn't like it, and especially in the kind of in the green fields. But I think it looks great. But then again, I quite like the look of some pylons as well. But I know a lot of people don't really like that.
I wouldn't go that far.
But I kind of, maybe I'm a bit more pragmatic about it. I think, well, this is stuff that's carrying electricity to people, so it's very useful. And therefore, I can put up with it.
It's very interesting what you're talking about, sort of being able to store power and energy as well. I've been reading quite a lot recently about Tesla, and would they be relevant to this discussion? Because I think they're developing some
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So I think they're basically a car manufacturer. That's their core thing, and they've gone into electric vehicles, which is a potential game changer sort of for the future. And their key thing is the battery. So if they can get kind of cheap enough batteries that are efficient and effective, then that will be the thing that they need to get electric cars to really competitive against other cars.
To your knowledge, are they sort of finding ways to store energy in a different way with these batteries, or?
I don't know if it's storing in a different way. I think it's just making them more efficient. I mean, I'm sure it is doing it in a different way, but in a way that I don't understand. But it's still as you and I would think of it, as a battery. Also, there are different types of storage. I mean, I don't know if Tesla's doing it so much, because Tesla's kind of focusing particularly on the sort of the battery kind of thing. But there are other things, like, for example, you pump water up a hill when you've got the electricity, and then you keep it up there until you need it, and then you let it go down the hill, and it turns into sort of a turbine. And there are other kind of things, new things that we're learning how to do like that could help.
If you wielded all the power in the world in terms of finding a solution, if you were the man to flick the switches to find a solution for our energy crisis, what would be your top line decisions to expedite and ensure the proliferation of the human race?
That's a big one. And I don't think there's a single thing. I mean, maybe I'll paint it in two different ways. I mean, I think you need to use the various kind of policy tools available. So international cooperation is key, because no country can do this on their own, both in terms of, if we reduce our emissions in this country, then we're only like 1% of what's going on in the world. So international cooperation, I think there's definitely still a part to play for supporting new technologies like renewables to bring their costs down. But I think you've got to do that in the context of saying, that's not going to be there forever. That support has to gradually phase out so that the technologies can stand on their own 2 feet in the future. I talked about sort of what's called the smart agenda, which is about storage, about more efficient use of our assets. So rather than always having to turn up electricity production when you need demand, maybe you can better match the demand with the production you've got, but obviously in a way that that consumers are happy with. And I think, overall, a kind of a mix of technologies until, for the medium term at least. But I guess my vision would be, in the future, in the UK, let's say specifically, a situation where you have, lots of offshore wind, because the cost has come right down. You have pretty much every rooftop has solar on it, including on factories and supermarkets and things like that.
Particularly on places like that.
Particularly on places like that. Possibly some nuclear to back you up. You have almost no gas and coal, and you help balance the system with lots of storage in people's houses, and they use electric cars, and you have sort of smart meters, which means that there are signals sent instantaneously that allow your various appliances to be turned on when the electricity is being produced, and you're at work and you don't know, you don't really care about it, rather than all being turned on at the same time when the electricity isn't being produced.
The Internet of Things, would it be somewhere in that sort of realm?
Yeah, exactly.
I look around me these days and I sort of go for a walk in the evening streets, for example, and I see shops, massive shops, with all of their massive, crazy light displaying all their stuff when the shop's closed. And I think about our use of energy, and it's absolutely unbelievable when you look at a small area of the world and think the whole world uses that sort of energy. Do you think there's going to be a time in the next 50 or 100 years where we really do have to ration our energy more, where we're forced to ration our energy because the transition between fossil fuels and renewable fuels, or whatever our solution becomes, is not seamless? Do you think there's going to be a period, where we're changing over, or do you think it's been planned sort of well enough that we're never going to really have to take our foot off the gas? And the second half of that question, just so I get it all into one, is I'm the sort of person that wants to sort of increasingly take responsibility for myself. So regardless of the world politics and, the general movement of the world, I'd like to think that I'm, being as efficient as I can. So what could I do on a micro level? What can I do to improve the energy situation?
Okay. I think on the first one, it's a really difficult question, because when you look at those lights on in the evening and you think that's just a pure waste, you've got to wonder, well, actually, is it? So if the lights weren't on, would you go into that shop? And if you didn't go into the shop, then those guys are sort of thinking, well, that's our own business, so it's actually worth keeping the lights on so people come in. Now, that's a really crass way of putting it, but I think we will. What human race is good at doing is gradually making kind of small improvements and getting more efficient. So what we should be doing is having, as you said, the Internet of Things that would say, well, do we really need to have the heating on when we're at work? Well, no, we don't, obviously. We'll turn it off, and those kind of things. So will it be really, really rationed? I mean, I don't know. I think time will tell whether we get to some major crisis like that. I would hope not, because I would hope that we continue to have electricity, hopefully clean electricity, that allows us to do the things that we need to do, and have livelihoods and economic growth and everything. So so I've got Dennis in now. So
what do you like with Dennis? Are you really like sort of gooey and or are you just
most of the time? But he started crying when I said that there wasn't going to be a crisis, so maybe he thinks I should be a bit more cautious than that. But the other thing was about what you personally can do. I think there's plenty of things you can do things like get sort of smart technology that allows you to know what your electricity energy consumption is, and then you can sort of do things that will allow you to reduce it or to be much more efficient in it.
Are those things readily? Are those
and
pieces of technology sort of readily available now on the market?
Yeah, they are readily available. You can get them, you know, sort of in-home displays. You can get them sort of going straight to your phone, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's really good.
Is there a specific product that you could recommend? I know that's a difficult question, but is there something that where I could begin my research to have a look into a certain product or
yeah, I mean,
brand?
you should have a look at things like Hive and Nest. These products that kind of are home energy systems. And I think those can be quite good.
They just sort of pull the plug on things which aren't working efficiently, basically, whilst you're out and about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at its simplest, they will do things like turn off the heating when you don't want it on, but it's some of it is just making it really easy for you. So you've got it on your phone, and you can just turn on your app, and then very easily adjust the temperature and things like that. But they can also automate it so that it does it automatically at certain times. And I think actually a subtle one that people can do is they can just think, actually, what energy do I really need, and what do I not mind so much about? And there's also always kind of lots of stories about people worrying about information about their electricity usage being shared, and somehow that being really sinister and everything like that. I mean, maybe some people might have concerns, but actually for the majority of us, we probably don't. So we shouldn't worry about, I think we shouldn't worry about that kind of stuff. And I think we should kind of embrace that kind of sharing of information that allows us to be using our electricity and energy more efficiently. I was going to say there are bigger things you can do, like, you can put solar panels on your roof if you've got a roof. You can think about, when, your lifestyle and when you travel, can you work from home? And does that help? Does that reduce your footprint and things like that? The more classic things.
Yeah, again, that's a really interesting one. It's a question I've asked other people as well. Do you think that in sort of 50 or a few generations' time there will be a big move towards people working more from home?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that I heard this story, I don't know if it's true, but someone works as a training consultant for a major kind of global public sector organization who made the business case that they could base themselves in Thailand and basically do their job just as effectively than being based in London, and managed to do that. So they basically just video conference all the time, and it sounds quite cool. I don't know if it works, but I think it does, and I think we've got systems in place where people can work from home, and it's just the same, as being in the office. Also, it'll be really exciting because then we could open up, people will be working all over the world, and you wouldn't be limited to specific conurbations. You could go anywhere.
It'll be absolutely amazing. I think the practical considerations for senior management and for companies is, would they be able to, oversee and manage the output and the productivity of their staff members if they were working remotely? But my partner's so busy that when she works from home, she gets loads more done than when she's in the office. She's constantly being pulled into meetings and asked to do various, peripheral things when she's in the office. But when she works from home, she tends to get so much more done.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. It wouldn't work so much if the management style is about looking over people's shoulders and making sure that they're really working. But I think in a lot of our work that we're moving away from that. We're about about knowledge, about kind of being effective and spreading their time in a way that's most effective, rather than thinking you've got to be there from 9 to 5 and you've got to show you're working. So, I think the workplace is changing, and that will really, really help things.
2 more questions, Tom, and then I'll leave you to it.
Yeah.
This is a question I ask everybody on a completely separate issue. Inspiring bits of culture. Who's your favourite band? What band inspires you most?
The Country Sound. It's quite good.
Have you heard First Aid Kit?
I have a little bit. Yeah, that's quite good.
They are wonderful.
But to be honest, nothing really cuts it out there. The world is still waiting for the new sound. So I'm a bit unimpressed, really, overall. Don't
you think you get to a certain age and then you just stop listening to new stuff and just start sort of poring over your retrospective archives?
Yeah. Although I'd much prefer to be poring over the sort of the logic and pumping some new stuff out. But I think there's some really interesting. Look, actually, to be honest, there is some really interesting stuff. And it's fantastic. you've got all these things where people are just putting out a song, and then other people are remixing it, and it's all bouncing around, and everything's getting mixed up, and it's fantastic. So,
oh, you like the idea of sort of getting some raw material and then throwing it out there for various people to do what they like with it?
yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. And then you just really get a kind of a, it's classic melting pot, but it's not. It's a global one, and all the different genres are kind of mixing up, and it's really good.
A song of yours which you sent me ages ago, I'm going to put it on the page which I make for my Energy special with Tom Luff, and I'm going to put your Oasis song on there.
Oh no!
Which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. As I remember, it's a remix, and it includes it's Oasis. It's the backing track of Oasis Wonderwall, is it? Or
yeah, it's Wonderwall. It's Jay-Z, and then I think it's got a bit of U2 on there as well.
Has it?
I think that's the beat.
Ah, it's brilliant. I absolutely love it. Still to come on this episode of The Natural High, we get some great book and music tips from Tom. But I just wanted to invite you to sign up for free to The Natural High, which concerns itself solely with the pursuit of happiness in all its glorious forms. Simply go to the homepage at naturalhigh.club and pop your email address in there for pleasingly infrequent alerts about new podcasts and other eye-opening natural highs. Alternatively, follow us on Twitter at Natural High Club. I must also apologise for any sound problems which might have occurred during this interview. I'm currently in the Netherlands and Tom in the UK, so we conducted this interview over Skype and the connection wasn't always great. I hope it hasn't impaired your overall enjoyment, and we shall always aim to offer you the highest quality sound possible while getting the best and most interesting interviewees on the show, wherever they may be. Love you. Books. What's your favourite book? Something that you've loved and in fact been inspired by and maybe given to somebody else?
Can I give you three?
Nice.
Then otherwise I won't look so mental. The first one is an existential one, which is it's called Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre.
Nausea.
And it's Nausea, yeah. And it's pretty amazing in that it kind of just, for me, gave me a sort of a different perception of the world.
Brilliant.
Then the cliche one, but lots of people choose this, but it's called Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. She was a bit extreme as a person, the author, but I quite like the sort of the simplicity of the idea in it overall.
Can you describe the idea very briefly?
Basically, it's an architect, and he does things in a way that is purely how he thinks it should be. So it's pure, it's artistic kind of purity, basically, and he doesn't compromise his artistic stance. Basically, that's the moral philosophy of this person, that you have to just do things purely. It's an argument against cooperation and just kind of compromise. So it's quite extreme in some ways, but it's quite interesting. The third book is called Little Prince, and it's by this author, French author called Antoine de Saint-Exupéry.
Okay.
Exupéry. I never pronounced that right, but
those references are great because I haven't read any of those books, and I'm going on holiday in a couple of weeks, and I will definitely buy at least one.
You should get a Little Prince. I mean, it's kind of sort of for children in some ways, but it's actually it's quite nice as well.
It works on many levels, as the cliche goes.
Yeah.
Give me a brief synopsis of The Little Prince.
It's a little prince who lives on a planet and wants to travel around and does a bit of traveling and ends up on Earth, and then meets a few interesting individuals, and then sort of disappears. And that's it.
Okay, it sounds a little bit like some kind of fable. Is there a fable in there?
Yes, it is a fable.
What's the message?
I think there are lots of messages in there. It's quite poignant that the author disappeared. He was a pilot, and he sort of, his plane went down somewhere. I don't think they ever actually recovered the plane, but he sort of disappeared sometime after he wrote the book. So there's some kind of strange kind of symmetry there.
Absolutely. So the Little Prince goes missing, and so did the author ultimately.
Yeah, exactly. But it's it's a funny book that I read first when I was 10, and then I kind of sort of tried to read it every 10 years. And it hasn't quite worked like that, but it's kind of nice to a bit of a continuity.
I had a book which left a massive imprint on me when I was a kid, and I've never been able to find it since. It was called something along the lines of Peoples, Places and Countries, or something like that. And it was very picture-based. It was just describing the world, the past, the present and the future. And, you know, as a kid, you're like, your imagination runs riot, and getting this sort of information and all these sorts of pictures of how people might look in the future in terms of being composed of all sorts of metal and titanium parts and all this sort of stuff was absolutely amazing, but I've never been able to find it.
Oh, right, yeah.
My partner even bought me a namesake last Christmas, which I was so disappointed when I opened it. It was some sort of hardback novel from the 1900s, early 1900s, from some sort of scoutmaster, just sort of talking about his experiences as a scoutmaster. It was not the book that I remember.
The Natural High.